Okay, this is weird, but I love shopping for cars. I know. I enjoy the process of looking at cars until just the right, fun, small, quirky, economical car speaks to me. And when I do find that car, I always hope that I'll get the aggressive salesperson, this is serious, who asks, "What do I need to do to get you into that car today?" Because I always have an answer. I name a ridiculously low price. And if the salesperson just gives me that look and says, "Well, I don't think we can do that," I know it's time to leave because this guy won't be any fun. But if the salesperson gives a different answer, like, "Well, let's talk about your trade-in," or "Let me talk to my manager," then I know the process is going to be a lot of fun. And I am not one of those people who drives a hard bargain. I'm not a good negotiator. I always pay more for the car than somebody who drives a hard bargain. But I enjoy the fun of that negotiation and that process. Because it all begins with the question, what do I need to do? Well, the story we just heard is traditionally called Doubting Thomas. And I gotta say, there are more than a couple things wrong with that particular title. First off, Thomas was not the only follower of Jesus who had his doubts. A lot of the followers, in fact, all of them doubted whether Jesus had been resurrected. It's a certainty that every follower to whom the women reported questioned what was going on. In Matthew's gospel, for instance, said that the followers who had heard Jesus was risen had been summoned to the mountain and they saw Jesus, and some still had doubts. Mark says the women were afraid to tell anybody what happened. Why? Because they knew nobody was going to believe them. Luke said the others thought the women were spouting nonsense. And in John, well, poor Thomas gets the short end of that stick. But he's not the only one who doubted whether Jesus was raised to life. So the name Doubting Thomas is really unfair to Thomas. And to take it even a step further, let's remember that the other followers had had the experience of Jesus appearing to them in the room. They saw Jesus, they saw the wounds, they heard his voice, and they believed. Unfortunately, poor Thomas was out on a fast food run or who knows what, and he missed the whole event. So rather than calling him Doubting Thomas, perhaps we should call him Absent Thomas or Missing Thomas. Anything but doubting. So rather than focus on doubt, which has usually been the interpretation of the story, hasn't it? Yep. Those of us who believe and don't have doubts, rah, rah, rah. Okay, who hasn't had doubts? But the story is focused on Jesus' willingness to help Thomas believe. What would it take for Thomas to believe in Jesus as the risen Christ? Now, I suspect I'm not the only one who knows people who doubt the presence of God in their lives or the presence of the risen Christ. True? Not the only one? Yeah. And when those who doubt talk to me, they invariably ask, "Well, why do you believe?" Somewhat in a harsh, "Come on, prove it to me" kind of a way. And I respond with some of the stories about when God is very real for me. I talk about God in nature and creation. I talk about God in babies and in children. I talk about the experience of God in hindsight, when I can look back and say, that's got to be God. And the doubters will always be able to explain away those examples with comments about science and science is not God, or sentimentality. All that is a desire to believe. And I don't blame them for doubting. After all, a lot of people wonder if God and science have anything to do with each other. I think they do, but a lot of people wonder. And I don't blame anyone for wondering if it really is sentimentality or emotion that causes me to believe in God. Because, well, let's say absent Thomas, remember absent rather than doubting, questioned the other followers when they talked about their experience of Jesus. Because he didn't need their comments. He didn't need to hear their experience. He needed an experience of Jesus for himself so that he could truly believe in Jesus as the risen Christ. In fact, When Thomas expressed his doubts, it was almost as if Jesus was in the room saying, Thomas, what's it going to take for me to come alive in your heart and in your life? What's it going to take? And Thomas had a really specific answer. He said, I won't believe until I see and touch the scars in his hands, and I must be able to put my hand into the wound left by the spear. Now, Thomas knew exactly what he needed, and he was really clear about what he needed to believe. Now, the thing about this story is I don't think we can really appreciate the extent of God's generosity to Thomas unless we really stop to think about it. Because Thomas said, God, this is precisely what I need. And Jesus 1 week later appeared and offered him exactly what he needed. But Jesus didn't have to do that. Jesus, the risen Christ, at one with the God of the universe, did not have to show up and meet Thomas's exact demands. He could have let Thomas spin. He could have let him struggle to believe and feel as though he missed out. But Jesus amazingly and generously gave Thomas exactly what he said he needed to believe. Jesus, at one with the God of all the universe, took time out of his busy post-resurrection schedule to meet with Thomas. And that, friends, is truly quite remarkable. Quite something. Now, I believe we're all here this morning because in one way or another, God has responded to our demands for belief. God asked us, what will it take? And then responded to our answers. Now, we may never have thought about it like that question where God's saying, what's it going to take for me to live in your heart and be present in your life? But I invite us to think about it for a moment. What was it that caused us to believe in the love of God and the presence of the risen Christ in our lives? What did God have to do? For me, I knew that I needed to know that God loved me. I knew it in my head, but my heart had a whole lot of doubts. And after years of struggling with that question, after years of doubting that God could love such a one as me, after years of wondering how God, in spite of everything in my life, could really love me, I decided I needed a direct yes or no answer, up or down answer. And so I bluntly said out loud to God, do you really love me? Ready for the answer to be no, until I felt a touch on my shoulder. And that moment changed my life. It changed my understanding of everything about life. So the question for each of us is, what did it take for us to know the reality and the presence and the love of God in our lives? And if we don't have an answer, it might be time to think about it. Because for some of us, it's going to be the presence of the unconditional love of parents that was there from the moment we were born to the moment they left this world and beyond. For others of us, it's that unconditional love of another adult. If our parents couldn't quite get there, another adult who came into our lives and said, you are fine and perfect and loved just the way you are. For some of us, it was the moment when God appeared in a way that was real and tangible. For a lot of us, it was something else. But it is my belief that if we think about it, each of us will be able to name how God offered us exactly what it took for us to believe. Now, some of us are here because we'd love to believe. We would love to have that experience. We have waited and wondered and asked God for years, come on, God, let me have a moment like that. I've never had that moment when I felt the reality of your presence. I've never had that moment when I believed in a risen Christ. I've never had that moment when it was so clear you were walking with me. And so the question for us to think about is, what would it take for each of us to believe that Jesus is the risen Christ and that God is real in our hearts and in our lives? What would it take to get God and us into each other today? What will it take to put trust, faith in God's presence in our lives? A lot of people say, well, I'm waiting for world peace. Oh, good luck. Because frankly, that depends on human beings a whole lot more than it depends on God. God's more than willing We just keep getting in the way. How about ending world hunger? Oh, please. Same answer, same problem. World hunger could be ended tomorrow if we human beings decided to get along with each other. There's more than enough food in the world. We've just got to get all the greed and the politics and the people out of the way. So it's not a big global answer for us. The question is, for each of us specifically, what would it take for us to truly believe that God is alive and real and present and walking with us in our lives? What does God need to do to get us to believe? Perhaps as we talk with those who do not believe, those who express doubt, or those who are more than willing to take a pot shot and shoot down our reasons for believing, the question might be, so what would it take for you to believe? What do you need for God to be alive in your lives today? Because I am convinced beyond a doubt that God will respond to a real, genuine, personal request. I'm convinced because God answered Thomas, God answered me, and neither one of us are anything special. So I believe that God will answer each one of us. God will answer you too. What will it take? Amen.